Welcome to the Indomitable podcast. I'm your host, Di Cerullo, and today we have another great episode that will leave you inspired. My guest today is the indomitable Stephanie Jordan. Stephanie is an author, teacher, speaker, cosmetologist, salon owner, and mother to 5 amazing kids. Oh my gosh, 5 kids. Her latest book, The Death Tsunami, An Unexpected Journey into Widowhood and How I Met Death, details her emotionally honest experience with loss. When she is not writing, speaking, or creating hair art, you can find her riding a Harley-Davidson Sportster 1200, flaunting new healthy gluten-free recipes on her cooking blog, painting, reading, watching movies with her family, and spending time outdoors. Wow, 5 kids. Hello, Stephanie. I am so grateful to have you here.
Hi, I'm so thankful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, tell us a little bit about yourself that I didn't share in your early bio here.
Okay. I am a mother of 5 kids, and
Woo!
I actually never wanted children. It's been the greatest gift of my life. I'm so grateful. I was really selfish as a young person, and so the thought of like sacrificing self for children was nowhere in my
Right.
wheelhouse, right?
Totally. Yes.
And so yeah, I grew up here in Alabama, and
Mhm.
I came into adulthood dumb as dirt, and I have been on a 20 some odd year journey of healing from being dumb as
Mhm.
dirt and healing from my childhood. And
Mm.
I love the name of your podcast because
Thank
Indomitable
you.
Moxie is my jam.
Yes. Well, when the cards that you have been dealt fall a certain way, it's not even like, you don't get to choose. So the
So
only
true.
choice you make is whether or not to survive it. So I completely agree. And if y'all can't see her hair is absolutely fabulous and fantastic. And I'm just hoping that mine even holds up with oh God, I haven't done it so long. I'm just sitting here looking at her fabulous rainbow hair and I'm like, I gotta do that. I gotta get more into stuff.
So as a hairstylist, I believe that if you have a good cut and a good color, it's
Mm-hmm.
super low maintenance. I mean, it
Ooh,
literally takes me virtually no time to do my hair. And
that's
even if I
bananas.
throw it up into a ponytail, people
Mm,
are like, "Oh, I love your hair." And it's just
mm,
because it's visually interesting, you know?
mm. I mean, it is visually interesting. I'm constantly thinking to myself when I'm adding my hairspray in the morning, I'm just sitting there doing the old Southern tease it to Jesus bit. And like, I'm just sitting there like, at what point is it the right, like off of my head so it's not too flat? But all right, I'm just kidding, guys. I'm not really going to have a conversation about hair today, but I might. So don't
That's
tempt me,
hey, look, we can
right?
talk hair. There's
I
lots of
mean, we
information.
might, we might. Don't tempt me. All right, so let's get started a little bit. Tell me about your husband.
Um, well, there's been 3
Right.
of them. So which one would you
Oh,
like to hear about?
I mean, you know what? Let me track that back. You start where you want to start, okay? And we'll go from there.
Well, okay, so being dumb as dirt, coming out of childhood, I married young, a
Mm.
month before my 22nd birthday,
Oh
the
gosh.
first time, and I married an alcoholic because
Mm.
I knew nothing about alcoholism
Mm.
and how damaging it is and how destructive it is. And we had great sex and a lot of fun, and that was all I cared about at 21 years
Mm.
old.
Of course.
So
Right.
we got married, and I got pregnant with my oldest son about a year and a half later, and then he ended up beating me up while I
Mm.
was pregnant.
Oh
And
Lord.
so I prayed that night. I said, God, if you'll get me and my baby out of here alive, I will never come back. And
Mm.
so I left. And there was so much in that. Like,
Yeah.
um, there was an angel, a friend of mine, who let me come to her house, and I didn't have to
Mm.
figure it all out. She didn't press me to have all the answers today. Like, are you
Right.
leaving him? You need to leave him. She didn't do any of that. And
Right.
that was such a grace. So
Mm.
if you're ever dealing with somebody that has just gotten their butts kicked by their spouse,
Yeah.
just don't make them figure it all out today. Like,
Right.
it may be black and white for you, it's not black and white for them.
Mm.
And so, when the heart is mixed in, I mean, I love this guy. Like,
Mm.
I I didn't want to be without him. That's why I was married to him, right?
Right. Right.
But I told him, I said, look, you married the wrong girl if you want to punch him back, because that
Mm.
is not
Mhm.
me. I will not tolerate
Mm.
that.
Mm-mm.
And I never could have done that to my son. I never could have allowed my son to live in that. Um,
Yeah.
and so that was, um, that was a lot. And I tried to work that marriage out for 2 years, but,
Mm.
um, he was never going to sober up. As a matter of fact, he passed away in 2022 from
Mm.
alcoholism at 44 years old.
Mm-mm.
And so, he never got better. He never sobered up. And, after I divorced, 2 weeks later, I ran into my husband. We were at a punk show. Actually, I had my
Mm.
son with me,
Mhm.
and we had known each other in our teen years, but he actually hated me because I was a Christian.
Mm.
I,
Mm.
I was the only Christian in the Birmingham punk rock scene, and he was
That is
like,
surprising to hear, but I'll There's a lot of Christians involved in punk in my experience, but I'll continue. Okay.
so, um, in the early 2000s, the scene actually grew a good bit. This was the
Mm.
1990s. So this was prior
Mm.
to when,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the Christian hardcore scene had developed.
Right, right, right. Yep.
And, um, yeah, he hated my guts. He hated everything about God.
Mm. Mm.
And so when we ran into each other at the show, he had gotten saved. Actually, I have to tell this because this is such a cool thing. So he was a drug
Please.
addict,
Right.
and his life's goal was to OD on his 21st birthday in New Orleans.
Holy
And
cow.
yes, and instead of that, he was baptized on his 21st birthday in New Orleans. And
Wow.
so he died in New Orleans. It was just to himself and not
Wow.
actually physically.
Whew.
So that was really cool. So we
Mm.
started talking, and he was telling me, about being a Christian, and I was like, you're so full of crap. You're just hitting on me, right?
Mm. Mhm. Right.
And it wasn't that at all. We ended up developing a pretty incredible friendship. He dated me for 6 months before I was
Mm.
even willing to consider dating him. I was
Of
so
course.
broken from
Mm.
my first marriage, and just really terrified of men, to be
Mm.
honest. And he
Yeah.
was just
Yeah, that
gracious.
happened.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
He was so gracious and patient with me, and he just stayed the course. And so we got married in June of '04,
Mm.
and he taught me more about love than I could have ever imagined.
Wow.
And he was a
Surprising
total
turnaround for him in that story, huh?
yes, he was a total
Not
pain
where
in
I
my
thought he was
ass.
going. Yeah, not where I thought he was going, I'll be honest. That's a good turn for him. Okay.
Yes.
So, then what happened?
So then we had 4 kids together. We built
Mhm.
a lot of life together. We opened a salon, and every year of that marriage was, I call it so I have a panoramic view of my life, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
there's nothing more gorgeous than a panoramic view. And in that panoramic
Mm.
view, if you've ever been to the Rockies or whatever, and you can get a
Mhm.
panoramic view of the peaks and the valleys and all of that around, it is
Mhm.
just breathtaking.
Right.
So my marriage with Jay was what I call the panoramic view of the Rockies in my life. We
Right.
had high
Right.
highs and low lows.
Right.
And
Right.
that made it interesting. I was never bored.
I was never bored. That's very non-committal, very not too much information. I love those. Perfect. That's very bless your heart of you.
Yes, yes. Okay, so you come from a trauma background, right? So you
I do.
understand
Yes, I do.
like how chaos is comfortable?
Yes, in the beginning, right? Like before you start
Yes.
healing yourself, you are this might not be, I'm just saying this because it might not be something that everybody knows, but you don't choose the best relationships for you when you come out of a trauma background. You choose the
Yes.
relationships that you are comfortable in. And comfort doesn't necessarily mean good for you, it just means it's what you're used to. So in the
Yes.
beginning, you end up choosing really terrible relationships. I sure did. I mean, like, I'm not here to lie to anybody. I absolutely chose bad people for myself.
Yeah.
However, eventually as you heal, life changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a lot. Our story was that
Mhm.
we both were kind of train wrecks when
Yeah.
we came
Yeah.
into our marriage.
Mhm.
And um, within the first year, a year and a half of our marriage, he ended up having a relapse
Oh no.
and started
Yeah.
using again. And that nearly
Mm.
destroyed us. It was so devastating. And the difference between drugs and alcohol, they're the same awful beast with two heads, but
Mm.
one head is way uglier than the other. And drug addiction is way uglier than alcoholism. And I say uglier not in that the behaviors are different. Alcohol is accepted, right? So anybody will
Right.
buy you alcohol. Like that was one of
Right.
the
Right.
issues is that nobody cared that my marriage was falling apart with an alcoholic. They would still buy him alcohol and not even think twice.
Right.
But with Jay, with his relapse, that wasn't acceptable. Nobody was buying him drugs. He was the one pursuing that, right?
Right. Right.
And in the process, stealing everything. My ex never had to steal anything because people would buy him stuff if he didn't have the money. It was no big deal.
Right.
Where, Jay would steal things out of the house and pawn everything. And it was just so shady and so seedy. And just,
Mm.
I constantly felt like I was having to protect myself.
Right.
And then he went to rehab. I
Mm.
started doing Al-Anon through all of this, and
Yeah.
that was when I first realized I was codependent. I didn't even know what the heck
Right.
codependency was.
Right. Please explain codependency for the record here, if you don't mind.
Well, for all of you people in relationship with addicts of any kind, it's all their
Mhm.
fault. No, I'm just kidding. You were part of the cycle, and that is called
Right.
codependency. And you are either going to
Right.
be an enabling codependent, or you are going to be a
Mhm.
controlling codependent, or you'll be a hybrid
Mhm.
of the two.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I am a controlling codependent. I feel like if I have
Mm.
control over the situation, that
Yes.
that I can prevent the bad stuff
Yes.
from happening, right?
Right.
So if
Right,
I
right, right.
had him on the phone, he wouldn't be using drugs. If
Mhm.
I took the car away from him, he wouldn't be able to get drugs.
Mhm.
If he didn't
Mm.
have any money, he wasn't going to be able to get drugs. Like I felt like if I could just control him, then it wasn't
Mm.
going to happen.
Right, 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 right.
And so codependency is basically where your emotions or feelings rest in somebody else. Their
Right.
actions and behaviors affect you to the point where you are incapable of functioning autonomously without
Right.
them.
Right.
So I started doing Al-Anon, and I'm like, how in the heck are you supposed to be autonomous in a marriage? Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how are you supposed to be one with somebody but yourself?
Right. Right.
And that was
Right.
a really complex concept for me.
Right. Of course. Of course it was. Yeah.
So I started learning to set boundaries and have boundaries, and they got firmer and firmer. And
Mm-hmm.
then I ended up kicking him out because I
Right.
busted him using.
Wow.
And I couldn't control him, but eventually it came down to like, hey, if you don't go and get help, you can no longer be around me and the children.
Right.
And so he was out of the house for a total of 6 weeks. The
Mm-hmm.
first month of that, I would still let him come around,
Mm-hmm.
and come to the house and like pick the kids up and still like co-parent with me, but he wasn't
Right. Right.
living there, right?
Right. Right.
And then I got to the point where I was like, the only
Mm.
time you will be able to see us is in a public place for a limited amount of time.
Mm.
And I just had
Right.
to narrow things down more and more.
Mm.
And so he chose to go to rehab, and he never
Good for
used
him.
again after that. But it took us years of healing to heal the
Right. Of
damage that was
course.
done.
Of course. Wow.
But me working on myself in that helped
Right.
the healing process happen, right? Because if it was
Right.
all just his fault and I was
Mm-hmm.
not responsible for any of it, then I
Mm-hmm.
became just a victim of the whole situation.
Right.
And
Right.
that isn't real. You're never fully a victim of any situation as an adult
Right.
because there are
Right.
options, right?
Right.
As
Right.
a child, that's totally different. You don't have
Right.
options. You were
You have
fully
options or
given.
agency. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. 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 Yeah.
But as an adult, that is not the story. And we have to take responsibility of the situations that we allow ourselves to get into and how we react and
Mm.
respond. And that is really what I learned through this relapse was I had to
Mm.
learn myself
Mm-hmm.
and how I
Mm-hmm.
react, how I respond, and how I behave to situations that I'm in. And I actually wrote a book about that. It's called Believing in Boundaries.
Mm.
And that came out in 2022.
Congratulations also on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
It's hard to write books.
It
It's hard.
is.
It's hard to find the time. Like, I know tons of people who are constantly like, "Oh, I'm going to write a book." And it's like, "Yep, no, you should start. That's where you should start today." Like
Yes.
you should start today. You know what I mean? While you're thinking I should do that, that's when you should start.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
I love it.
Agree. Yep. Proud of you. Awesome job.
Thank you.
So, what was sort of your next stage in sort of your own healing process?
So, by the time we got in a groove, right? And like life
Mm.
was kind of
Mhm.
trucking
Fast. Yep.
along, he
Mhm.
dies
Okay.
unexpectedly at
Oh my
38
lord.
years old
Wow. That is
of
young.
hypertension.
Really?
And
Wow.
because of his drug history, I
Mm.
almost posted his autopsy report just to prove what he
Wow.
had passed away of because it was so sudden. I
Right.
I just knew that a lot of people would be like, "Oh, he OD'd."
Mm.
And
Mhm.
and I was like, "You know
Right.
what? It's none of their business. Like these
It's
I
none of their
don't have
business.
to answer to these people.
Yeah.
Jay
Yeah.
doesn't have to answer to these people. I don't have
No.
to prove what he died of."
No.
And
No. If people were
what's
gonna
in
if people were gonna talk about you, they were gonna talk about you
That's
anyway.
right.
Nothing you said was going to inform their spirit whatsoever,
That's right.
at all, ever. Yep.
That's exactly
I'm
right.
glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't take that responsibility for that.
Yes. That's healing from codependency, right? Because my
Yes,
codependent self would
absolutely.
say to control the
To
way they
control, yeah.
think
Yes,
and the
yes,
way
yes.
that they respond and behave to my
Yep.
husband's death. I have to keep it
Right.
under control.
Right, 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 right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're so right. Yep. Oh.
So, um, so it was a normal day. I was down at the salon and
Mhm.
came home and we ate dinner and all the things. I mean, I'm 37, he's 38. Like, I didn't know anything
Mm.
about heart, anything
No.
at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Now he was morbidly obese. He was a very, very big man. He was 6'3",
Mm.
390 pounds.
Mm.
Um, he was built like a redwood. I always told him, I was like, "You're not a
Mm.
stallion, you're a Clydesdale."
Yeah. Yeah.
And he ended up, um, he had told me before that he had had some heart stuff. And I'm like, "Well, go to the doctor, go get seen
Mm.
about."
Mm.
But I had 5 kids. I'm not babying a grown man.
No. Right,
But I
right.
will
And they
tell you
won't go to
this.
the doctor without getting somebody to make them do it. Yeah, no,
Yes.
definitely. Mm.
Men, if you're listening, take care of yourselves. Your woman does not
Yeah.
want to have to baby you through it, but you are a
Nobody's
human
got
being.
time for that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But you are
You're a
still a
human.
person and you're still an organic person and you need to go to
Yes.
the doctor. And if you're thinking to yourself, ooh, does she mean me? I mean you. I mean you.
Yes.
This is
That's
your
exactly right.
sign. I mean you. Yes.
Yes. Go
Yeah.
take care of yourself.
Oh gosh.
Because you matter. You matter to
For
your
sure.
family, you matter to people, and you need to love
Yes.
yourself well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, yeah, after dinner, he got in the shower, which is what he would do a lot when he didn't feel well.
Mm,
And I was talking to a friend on the phone and doing deposits for the salon. And
hmm.
he was like, "Will you rub my back?" And I got up to rub his back and he started seizing. And that was
Oh my
it.
God.
That was it.
That was it.
I mean, within seconds, he was gone.
Mm,
I didn't know what to do. You know, my middle two children, heard me kind of freaking out and like starting
mm,
to scream for help. And I
hmm.
sent them across the street and you could hear the sirens coming. And I'm like, "Please watch out for my children. They're crossing the street."
Yeah.
Um, and then they called it and it was changed everything,
Yeah.
everything, which is where the death tsunami was birthed out of.
Right.
So we
Right.
just crested our 9 years since he passed
Hmm.
away.
Mm,
And so the death tsunami is my story about, I talk about our relationship a little bit in the beginning, but
hmm.
then the focus is really about my journey into widowhood and what I learned about life and what I learned about death. And
Mm.
um, it's been by far the hardest thing I've ever done.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. What is the most common misconception about widowhood to your mind?
That divorce and widowhood are the same.
Mm.
I get so, and I actually talk about this in the book.
Hmm.
I get very spent when people are like, "Oh,
Mm.
I'm divorced." I totally understand. No, you don't. No, you don't.
Right. How is
First
that
of
the
all,
same?
I'll say this: Jesus did not come to defeat divorce, he came to defeat death. And that death is such a powerful spiritual
Mm.
experience that very few people come back out of it
Absolutely.
without major damage done to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I've been divorced and I've been widowed. And so I know
Hmm.
both sides, right? I've
You
had the
know about that. Yep.
experience with both things. And so I can tell you educatedly, they are not
Right.
anywhere remotely
Not the
the
same.
same thing.
Right. Hmm.
Divorcing my first husband felt like ripping my arms and legs off. And it was
Mm.
terrible. It was
Hmm.
absolutely devastating.
Right.
But what I went through losing my husband, when
Mm.
death comes in, it annihilates everything. So
Oof.
you're annihilated physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I mean, in every avenue. And since then, if I have the chance, if I see that someone's become a widow, I will reach out to them to try and help them understand what's happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we see, like, prior to me being a widow, I just thought like, oh, I'd miss my husband, right? Like,
Right, right. You have sort
that,
of your own idea of how it would go, right? Yeah.
yeah, like, oh, that would be terrible. I'd miss him.
Mm-hmm.
There is no missing like missing of
Mm.
death. But then there's all this residual losses that you never even, I'm still experiencing them 9 years later, you know? I'll give you one example. Just about 2 years ago, I repainted my living room, and
Mm-hmm.
I told you he was super tall. He was 6'3". So he would raise his
Mm-hmm.
hands up over his head and kind of rest them along
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
the framing,
Yes, I do.
and he was a mechanic. So he would often have, you know, dirty fingers. And so his
Mm.
fingerprints were all along that line. And for years, I could not imagine covering. I could not have done it.
Right.
And even in that moment 2 years ago, I was like, I think I may frame his fingerprints and just paint
Mm.
around it. Like,
Just paint around it.
yes. But I didn't. I painted over it, and I'm still okay that I did. But that was still something I had to emotionally process, right?
Right.
I had to
Right.
actually physically think through and emotionally process it. And
Mm.
so those are some of the things that divorce and death are nowhere near remotely the same experience or the same thing. And
Mm.
secondly is all the residual um
Yeah.
emotional toll that it takes. It's incredible.
Mm. I am so sorry for your loss, but I am so proud of you for how you are responding to the loss, right? That is, I so often see people when they have gone through something tragic, um, always we end up making a significant portion of our identity about it, right? But that's just
Yes.
part of how it is. That's just part of how surviving something is. But having made the choice to not only survive it, but to be the person you needed someone else to be by finding other people who have become widowed and reaching out to them, I think that that's an incredible um, way to continue on in from that experience, and I'm very proud of you that you're doing that. um Good for you. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job
Thank you.
out there. That's exactly what you should be doing. um what is your advice to others who maybe are finding this as a result of keywords and potentially want to help another person who has experienced such a loss?
The first thing I usually tell them is, one, it's okay that you can't complete a thought. The difference between a
Mhm.
physical experience of death, we
Mhm.
cannot remove the spiritual component of death.
Right, right.
That is,
Sure.
so we think of death as a natural process, right? And
Hmm.
but it is the only natural process we go through that we cannot reconcile. And the
Right, of
number
course.
one reason is because we were never made to experience it.
Mm,
Death was
mm,
never meant to be the human experience.
mm,
But
mm,
because we're in these physical meat puppets that are having a
mhm,
physical experience, we
mhm,
do experience death, and it
mm.
wrecks us.
Right, of
Bec-
course.
because it's a spiritual component. It's not just a physical experience.
Right, of
And
course.
so what happens is like your brain shuts down. Almost
Mm,
immediately it goes into like a hibernation state.
mm,
And it's almost cruel because our culture today, like through the majority of human history, death was so common and it wasn't as
mhm.
sterile
Right, right,
as
right.
what we have today. We weren't disconnected from the death of our loved ones, that we
Right.
understood. It was just like everything else, more organic, right? And
Mhm.
so you would
Mhm.
not have left a widow to take care of anything. A
Right.
widow, for the majority of human history, would have had support.
Right.
The
Right.
unfortunate thing today is, the power companies don't care if you've lost somebody, your utilities don't care, your mortgage doesn't care. Like, there's nothing there that says, oh, we need to give her a break or
Right.
him a break from the day in and the day out.
Right.
So what
Right.
happens is, like, you had a partner to
Mhm.
do these things that now is gone. So now
Mhm.
you're having to do everything that you did already, plus what they did, and keep everything
Right.
like it's normal, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and that's an unrealistic societal expectation. So the first thing try and tell them is, like, it's okay that your brain shut off. Like, you don't have to make
Right.
any major decisions. None.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, and your body is also going to feel this, and like, you're going to feel like you just got ran over by
Mm.
a train, because you did.
Right. Right.
Because in
Right.
the physical realm, you're still fine. But
Right.
in the
Right.
spiritual realm, you've just totally been wiped out.
Right. Right.
It's okay to not be okay. Nobody
Right.
needs you to be pulled together today.
No.
Your
Yeah.
brain has
Yeah.
probably shut off and you can't form a thought, and
Mhm.
that's okay too.
Mhm.
Just,
Yeah.
if they can't figure out what you're trying to say, then just move on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the
Yes.
things that I will do is I will check in by way of like sending an animal fact of the day. So I won't be like, "Hey girl, how you doing today on this tremendous loss that you can't formulate words for?" I'm more like, "Hey, did you know that cats have all of these feelers in their ears? Do you know that Canada has the most lakes of anywhere?"
I
Like
love that.
that. I mean, because to me it feels like there's nothing to say. It feels like there's
That's
nothing
true.
to do. There's
That's true.
really only, I mean, and it feels like if I were going through something like that, even the check-in would be overwhelming, an overwhelming hurdle to jump. So just because you're here, what do you think like we should be doing? I mean, you have that experience, but like what should the rest of us do? How can we help?
So it's in, I love, this is such a good question. And I appreciate you asking it,
Thank you.
because so many people, so one of the interesting unknowns and unexpected is that you end up comforting other people in their
Of
grief.
course. That's exactly what I don't want. Exactly.
So, um, I would say, if, because the things like that you're sending are hilarious and would totally be a pick me up, but
Right.
even better, like, if you knew the person's spouse, would be
Mhm.
to add them into the sentence. So, like, if you send something about cats and you knew they hated cats, be like, I know that Jay would
Yeah.
hate this,
Right. Right.
because what
Right.
happens is, it's like people don't want to talk about them anymore. It's like
Wow.
it,
Yeah.
it's almost like they feel like they're reminding you of something you
Right.
think about obsessively, right?
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't it
Right.
doesn't go away, but what it does is it helps to connect you feeling with them instead of them
Right.
having to comfort you.
Right. 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 I had a friend who lost her mother, and the thing that she remarked to me about it at the time was just like it felt like everybody just went away. Like
Yes.
everybody just stopped talking to her in
Yeah.
general until a certain amount of preconceived time went by where they wouldn't have to bring it up in order to speak with her.
Yeah.
And then she felt like then they came back into her life again. Was that an experience that you shared, or is that common, or is that, I'm seeing you nodding, so I'm assuming it must be common. So like
Oh,
people
yeah.
just don't know what to say and they just go away?
Oh, people scatter like,
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
that was one of the things I talk about this in my book. They just,
Mm.
left. I had a pastor say to me so foolishly one time, um, I had set a meeting with him to tell him that, like, a man is what I lost, a man is what I need. And then he told me I
Mm-hmm.
needed to contact the husbands of the women in my small group. And I was like, no, you should
Mm.
never be expecting me to contact anybody's husband. That's what you are
Right.
here for.
Right.
But the most foolish thing I think he ever said, because he didn't pose a question like you just did, right? He didn't
Right.
say, in your experience, what happens? This is what he said to me. In all of his very non-widowed experience, he said to me,
Hmm.
well, I would like to think that my friends would step in and take care of my wife if something was to happen to me. And I
Mm.
was like, oh yeah, I guess you do.
Right.
Because that's what we'd all like to happen. But
Right.
let me share the reality of what
Right.
actually happens.
Huh.
And every
Right.
single one of those men that have been in your wife's lives for as long as you've been there, she
Mm-hmm.
will probably never even hear from again.
Wow. Wow.
Unless
That's
they want to
incredible.
date her. That's the only reason they'd stay around.
Mm.
The only
Wow.
reason a single one of them would stay around is if they have an interest in picking her up. But outside of that, they may come for a week, 6
Yeah.
weeks,
Yeah.
but 2 years in, 3 years
Right.
in,
Right.
gone.
So people leave you alone in your grief. That's that's not what we want. Community is everything.
They don't know how to handle it. Just like what your friend was saying, right? It was almost like they had to stay away until they didn't have to deal with it anymore, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sitting in somebody's grief is ugly, messy, terrible work, and you just
Human.
want things to be normal again. But nothing is normal for the one that went through loss. If you talk to a parent that's lost a child,
Right.
nothing is normal
Right.
anymore.
Right. It just if I mean, from my incredibly uninformed opinion, it feels like a fear of change. It feels like a fear of it feels like a fear of being wrong, right? It feels like since
Yeah.
there's no set thing to say, that it's better to just like float off into the sunset, when in reality it feels like the human thing to do would be there and suffer alongside them. Like, yeah, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing when something like this happens. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say. I can't always send food. Sometimes people don't let me. And so the only thing I can think to do is continue to check on that person in a way
Yes.
that doesn't cost them. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? And it's
Yeah.
just it's incredible to me that that's not what we're teaching people all the time. Like it feels like that people like yourself and others um would benefit more if more people knew how to handle it, how to deal with it. If we weren't like just like, oh, well, that's capitalism. We're going to continue to bill her monthly, and you know what I mean? It feels like
Right.
it all just feels so grubby. You know what I mean? It just feels so I don't know. I don't know what the right word is, but it just feels like we're not doing it. It feels like we're not making it for people. And that's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking that like somebody would go through a loss and then sort of lose their community around them as a result of the community not knowing how to support. That's tragic.
It's
That's
true.
insult to injury. That's tragic. Okay.
I will tell, going on that line.
Mm,
So, one of the things that people don't understand is that the person is already thinking about them anyway. So
right.
bringing them up isn't, it's actually beneficial, even if
Right.
they start crying. I
Right.
just posted a blog on my website that says how to function through tears.
Right.
And I think our sterile culture, we have a very sterile culture today,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
Most people
Yeah.
die in the hospital or they
Right.
end up disconnected from their family. I was
Right.
actually with Jay when he died. I was there when the coroner came and took him out of the room. I
Mm.
took all of his facial jewelry out, I
Mhm.
actually cut his
Mhm.
hair.
Mhm.
And the officer, because he died here at the house, an officer had to stay here the whole time,
Mm.
I guess, so I wouldn't do anything. And they had to do an autopsy because of his age
Right. Right.
and him dying at home. And so the cop came in and I was cutting his hair. And I was like, I know this may be weird, but I'm a hairstylist.
Right. I have a reason for this. Yeah. No,
And
absolutely.
I just figured that one day maybe my kids might want a piece of it or whatever, and it may
Mhm.
be deteriorated by that point, but whatever.
Mm.
At the
Right.
moment, it felt totally normal and fine and
Right.
something I could hang on to, right?
People do way weirder stuff than that. People do
That's
way
probably true.
weirder, right? Like people do way weirder stuff than that. In just like the things that I have heard. So like you do you. You do you.
Yes,
You know what
that's
I
right.
mean? Like, so you have it, whatever. None of your nobody that's nobody's business is what it is.
That's
It's nobody's business.
that's right. But it's so sterile, and I think that's part of the reason that people don't know how to handle it because
Right.
we're not in the process of it.
Right.
And, the people, if they pass away in the hospital, the family leaves and the hospital does everything and they never see them again until they're in a
Mhm.
casket. Like,
Mm.
we're not involved in the
Right.
process of
Right.
sending off loved ones anymore. And so, because death has, the physical part of death has become very disconnected, we have
Mhm.
also disconnected the spiritual component that comes along
Right.
with it.
It's true.
And just kind of, if what we can't see, right?
Right.
And
Right.
therefore we don't have to deal with it.
Right. Well, I mean, it feels like we've been intentionally removed from it as a result of discomfort, right?
Yes, that's exactly
Mm.
right. And
Right.
so if we don't have to deal with it, we don't see it, nothing's going on, then we can just pretend that really nothing is going on. And that just removes accountability. It
Right.
makes us feel better, right? Like, well, they're fine. They don't need me. Oh,
Right.
well, do
Well,
you really know
us
that?
outsiders, but like, does it make people experiencing death feel any more comfort? No. Right.
Nope.
Like, it's not making you more comfortable. So
That's right.
feels
That's
like
right.
feels like that's a miss. I'm gonna I'm gonna stop here because I literally could just be keep talking to you and asking you questions about this forever. But I want to let you get back to all the awesome you do in the world. So I'm sure everybody wants to, connect with you, hear more about what you do, how to follow you, and get in touch with you. How can they do that best?
So my website is www.thestephaniejordan.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I am looking for speaking gigs. So if you're out there and you hire for speaking, I would
Mm-hmm.
love to talk with you. Pop me an email.
Yeah.
Um, you can get my books off Amazon, Barnes and
Awesome.
Noble, and
Mm-hmm.
Books a Million.
Awesome.
So, and there should be links on my website to all of
Mhm.
those, but you can also look me up. And I'm on Instagram at the Stephanie Jordan and Facebook at the
Mhm.
Stephanie Jordan. And, if you need to talk, if you're suffering through widowhood or whatever, then pop me a message and I'd be happy to talk with you.
That is so awesome of you to offer. And y'all, Stephanie has already sent me all of these links, so you will be able to find them underneath in the show notes. Especially if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see those. So if you'd like to connect, I encourage you to do so. So, y'all, thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the Indomitable podcast for more incredible stories of humaning. And remember, my book, The Indomitable, A Foster Care Story, is available everywhere you get your books and is currently 5 stars on Goodreads, which I always say because I get so excited about it. Thank you to all my friends who came out to visit me at my book signing last week. It is always so rewarding to see people impacted by my story sharing their journeys. If you have upcoming events you'd like me to bring the Indomitable experience to, please submit a request via my website. And finally, as ever, I am so happy to have y'all in community with me. And remember, together we are truly indomitable. Take care, everybody.